14th regular meeting of Amherst City Council will come to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Janik.
Here.
Mr. Bukovac.
Here.
Mr. Goodell.
Here.
Mr. Van Churen.
Here.
Mrs. Wasilk. Here. Mr. Winarski.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Present.
We'll stand for the prayer by Chaplain Silk and remain standing for the pledge of flag by Sergeant Bukovac.
Will you bow with me, please? Gracious God, thank you for the blessing of this evening, where we can gather here in this chamber in safety. Thank you for the privilege we have to freely express our points of view tonight. We thank you for the veterans who made this freedom possible. Bless them, bless all who serve, bless our city, bless our nation, and now may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move on to item 4, the consent agenda.
Minutes of the regular council meeting held October 24th, 2016. Finance Committee meeting minutes held November 7th, 2016.
Mr. Goodell.
Make a motion to accept the consent agenda as read.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the consent agenda as read. Are there any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion carries. Move on to item 5, acknowledgement of the public pertaining to items on tonight's agenda. Anyone here wishing to speak on any item that is on tonight's agenda? If not, move on to item 6, ordinances and resolutions. First reading, item A.
An ordinance approving the 2017 interim budget and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Van Churen.
Move to suspend council rules so 6A can pass on its first reading.
Thank you. Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to suspend council rules, so item A may be passed on the first reading. Are there any comments? Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to take another moment to thank our mayor for thoroughly answering the questions that were posed by council during committee. And we appreciate your efforts and your ability to explain all the changes in line items and what's coming up. So with that, I yield back to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion carries. Mr. Winarski.
Motion to adopt.
Mr. Janik.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion carries.
It's ordinance O-16-37.
Item B.
An ordinance authorizing and directing the Safety Service Director to lease to own a 47-foot Versalift 47-1 aerial material handler for the electric department through the Ohio State Cooperative Purchasing Program and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Goodell.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend council rules so that item 6B may be passed on its first reading.
Thank you. Mr. Winarski.
I'll second.
There's a motion and a second on the floor to suspend council rules on item B, so it may be passed on the first reading. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Motion carries.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion and second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Janik.
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac.
Yes.
Mr. Goodell.
Yes.
Mr. Van Churen.
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk.
Yes.
Mr. Winarski.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Motion carries. Completes item 6. Move-
Ordinance
sorry.
O-16-38.
Sorry, interrupted. Move on to item 7, ordinances and resolutions. Second reading, item A.
An ordinance approving the developer's agreement with Micah Properties and Victor Nardini for road improvements to Kresge Drive.
Mr. Miller.
Move to take 7A on the third reading.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to take item A on to the third reading. Are there any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Vasil?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Motion carries. Completes item 7. We'll move on to item 8, ordinances and resolutions, third reading. Item A.
An ordinance approving the Design Review Board guidelines for the Downtown Historic District.
Mr. Van Kuren.
Move to adopt.
Mr. Miller.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Vasil?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Motion carries.
O-16-39.
Item B.
An ordinance amending Amherst Codified Ordinance Section 529.02 of Chapter 529 Liquor Control.
Mr. Goodell.
Make motion to adopt.
Ms. Vasil.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adopt. Roll call vote, please. Oh, Mr. Miller.
Yes, just, thank you for the time, Mr. President. Just one quick, brief comment on this. Once again, I appreciate the efforts by the Amherst Police Department and council to try to stop these social parties from taking place. I appreciate the efforts, however, I disagree with criminalizing negligent behavior. I think that adding reckless to this ordinance would have done the job it needed. I think this was a little overboard, thus I'll vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Anyone else? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Bukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Vasil?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
No.
Motion carries 6-1.
It's ordinance O-16-40.
Completes item 8. We'll move on to item 9, miscellaneous acknowledgement of the public. Anyone here wishing to speak on any item? Mr. Miller.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just briefly, I wanted to thank Mr. Bukovac and the rest of the mural wall committee who put on another Veterans Day event. That was very impressive. I appreciate the fact that after that event took place, there was an opportunity for my students who I brought from Firelands High School, college government students taking the my government course, came down, got to experience that, and then I want to piggyback on that to thank Mr. Bukovac again and our mayor for so graciously hosting about 40 kids in this chamber and doing a fantastic job of explaining local government from the mayor's perspective and from the council's perspective. And I really appreciate the time they took. It was on a Veterans Day. I guess that would be a holiday for government officials. But every day is a learning day, and I appreciate you being a part of that. So with that, I yield back to the floor.
Thank you. Anyone else? If not, we'll move on to item 10, agenda requests and committee meeting schedules.
There's quite a few tonight. I'll start with A-16-51. It goes to finance. It's increased appropriations in fire department EMS and declaring an emergency. The second is A-16-52, reappropriate funds for various accounts in the fire and police department and declaring an emergency for finance. The next is also finance, A-16-53, reappropriate funds to compensate certain employees for the improper calculation of federal and state withholding and declaring an emergency. A-16-54, also for finance, increase appropriations in various funds to compensate certain employees for the improper calculations of federal and state tax withholding, declaring an emergency. The next is A-16-55, building and lands, an ordinance consenting to ODOT bridge inspection services years 2018 and 2019 and declaring an emergency. A-16-59 for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the deputy treasurer, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. The next is A-16-57 for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits for the superintendents of utilities and water pollution control center, supervisors of the electric, sewer, street, water, and water pollution control center, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. The next is A-16-58 for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary for the director of the Office on Aging, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. The next is A-16-59 for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the fire chief, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-60, also for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the police chief and lieutenants, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-61 is for finance, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of all full-time non-bargaining members, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. The next is A-16-62 for community development, a resolution establishing a historic preservation district and the committees associated with declaring an emergency. And the final one is A-16-63 for building and lands. It's an ordinance to amend O-15-20 regarding the vacation of Westlake Drive and declaring an emergency. That's complete.
Thank you. Finance, Mr. Silk.
So I have 10 items. A-16-51, increase appropriation in fire department EMS and declaring an emergency. A-16-52, reappropriate funds for various accounts in fire and police department and declaring an emergency. A-16-53, reappropriate funds to compensate certain employees for the improper calculation of federal and state tax withholding and declaring an emergency. A-16-54, increase appropriations in various funds to compensate certain employees for the improper calculation of federal and state tax withholding and declaring an emergency. A-16-56, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the deputy treasurer, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-57, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the superintendent of utilities and water pollution control center, supervisors of the electric, sewer, street, water, and water pollution control center, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-58, an ordinance to establish the salary of the director of the Office on Aging, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-59, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the fire chief, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-60, and an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the police chief and lieutenants, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. A-16-61, an ordinance to establish the salary and benefits of the full-time non-bargaining members, repealing all ordinances in conflict herewith and declaring an emergency. That is complete, Mr. President, and I'd like to call that for 7 o'clock next Monday.
Thought you were going to run out of breath there for a minute.
Thank you, sir.
Building and lands, Mr. Janik.
I have two items, Mr. President. A-16-55, an ordinance consenting to ODOT Bridge Inspection Services 2017, 2018, 2019, and declaring an emergency. A-16-63, an ordinance to amend O-15-20 regarding the vacation of Westlake Drive and declaring an emergency. I'd like to call those for next Monday, November 21st at 7:20 p.m. Does that sound like enough time in between, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
7:15 you could call it.
7:15 p.m.? Thank you.
Streets, Mr. Bouvette.
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Community Development, Mr. Goodell.
I have one item, Mr. President. It's item A-16-62, a resolution establishing a historic preservation district and the committees associated with and declaring an emergency. And I would like to call that meeting for November 21st at 7:25.
Thank you. Executive, Mr. Van Turen.
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Ordinance, Mr. Miller.
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Utilities, Mr. Janik?
No items, Mr. President, please cancel.
Thank you. Recycle, Mr. Miller?
Continue to recycle, no items, please cancel.
Thank you. Technology, Mr. Vukovac?
No items, please cancel.
Thank you. Police and Fire, Mr. Winarski?
Nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you. That completes item 10. Move on to item 11, reports of administration.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Kakuka?
Yeah, the October reports have been distributed to all council. Any report?
Thank you. Mr. Ramsey?
Our October reports have been distributed as well. Any report?
Thank you. Mr. Bacora?
No report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Jeffries?
City leaf pickup continues. We're north of the tracks this week, south of the tracks next week, and we will extend, the mayor said we will extend another week if we need to do that. End of report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. A few weeks back, you passed a resolution for the AMI metering system. We have our workshop with AMP Ohio. It's a 2-day workshop, Wednesday and Thursday. They're going to be coming in looking for our needs, kind of designing the plan a little better. We'll know more what our costs are. They'll know more what our needs are. So hopefully sometime shortly after that, when I get my final proposal, I'll be back to council. We get final approval and we'll talk about budgeting that program. Also, after this, I'd like to go into executive session to talk about a few employee compensation issues. In the report.
Thank you. Mr. Purcell?
Do we need to accept the treasurer and the auditor's report?
Yes,
Okay.
but
That's next.
that's next item on.
Oh, then I move to accept the report of the administrator.
Thank you. Mr. Miller?
Second, please.
Motion is second on the floor to accept the reports of administration. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Reports are accepted. Now, Ms. Purcell.
I move that we acknowledge the monthly reports received from the auditor and the treasurer.
Okay, Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Okay. Has everybody got their reports from the auditor? Any questions on them, please? Okay. I'll take a voice vote on that. That everybody has got their reports? Roll call.
Roll call. Mr. Janik?
Yes.
Mr. Vukovac?
Yes.
Mr. Goodell?
Yes.
Mr. Van Kuren?
Yes.
Mrs. Wasilk?
Yes.
Mr. Winarski?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Miller.
Move to adjourn to executive session.
Mr. Goodell.
Second.
Motion is second on the floor to adjourn into executive session to discuss, Mr. Mayor, what are we discussing?
Employee compensation.
Compensation, okay. We are adjourned at
This boy wants to-
7:18.
See you, Mark. Thanks.